5-year-old disappears from inside her own home. No confirmed sighting after, no clear explanation, and the story that's supposed to explain it doesn't fully hold together. There's a point in this case where you realize you can't actually follow what happened anymore. Not because there aren't details, there are, but because the details that exist don't take you anywhere. A 5-year-old child is inside her own home on what should have been a completely normal day. She goes downstairs to play, something that wouldn't stand out at all in the moment. And then, that's it. There is no confirmed moment after that. No clear direction, no point where you can say, this is where everything changed. Just a place where the story stops, and everything after that has to be explained. This is a case trace society file, where we don't just repeat what happened, we look at what actually makes sense. Summer Wells was 5 years old. At that age, your world is small, structured, and completely dependent on the people around you. You don't leave on your own. You don't make independent decisions about where you're going. And you don't have the ability to navigate anything safely by yourself. Everything about your day is shaped by the adults in your life, where you go, what you do, when you move from one place to another. Which means when something happens to a child that young, it doesn't begin with them. It begins somewhere around them, with the people, the timing, and the situation they were placed in. We're told that earlier that day, Summer had been out with her mother. According to reported accounts, they made a stop at a lake and later went to a grocery store before returning home. On the surface, that part of the day feels completely normal, moving through public places, being seen, existing in spaces where other people are around. There's nothing in that portion of the timeline that immediately signals that anything is wrong. And that's important because it creates a clear contrast. Earlier in the day, she's out in the open, visible, part of a normal routine. Then they come back home. And from that point forward, everything becomes harder to track. According to reported accounts, once they were back home, Summer spent time outside with her mother, Candace Bly, and her grandmother, Candace's mother. They were planting flowers, something simple, ordinary, the kind of thing that doesn't stand out while it's happening. It's the type of moment that blends into the day and doesn't feel significant at all until you realize later that it was one of the last times she was seen. After that, we're told she went back inside with her mother, and at some point after that, her brothers say they saw her go downstairs to play. That becomes the final reported movement. There's no confirmed sighting after that moment. No one who can clearly say what happened next. Just a completely normal action, going downstairs. That turns into the last point anyone can anchor the timeline to. At some point after that, something changes. It doesn't happen in a way that's visible or obvious to anyone outside the home. There's no clear event, no sound, no moment that draws attention. It's a realization that happens quietly. According to reported accounts, her mother goes to look for her, calling for her, checking the house, going through the places she would normally be, and she isn't there. That's the first real break in the day. Not dramatic, not immediate chaos, just a point where it becomes clear that something is wrong. From there, everything starts to move quickly. Calls are made and law enforcement is contacted. When officers arrive, they begin doing what they always do in situations like this, trying to establish a timeline. Who saw her last, where she was, what time it was, what happened between that moment and now. And almost immediately, everything comes back to the same point. She went downstairs. And there's nothing confirmed after that. Search efforts begin quickly and expand outward from the home. This isn't just casual searching. It's organized, structured, involving law enforcement, volunteers, and search teams moving through the surrounding area. They are looking for anything that gives direction, any sign that shows where she went or what might have happened. But as those early hours pass, nothing definitive is found. no clear path away from the house, no confirmed location beyond that last reported moment. And that's where the case starts to feel different, because instead of the timeline expanding outward, it feels like it never really leaves the starting point. At that point, everything comes back to the people around her that day: her mother, Candace Bly, her father, Don Wells, and her grandmother, who was also present. These are the people she lived with, depended on, and spent her time around. Earlier that day, according to reported accounts, Candace Bly had taken Summer out to the lake, to the store, and then back home. Also reportedly with them during part of the day was a teenage boy, a family friend, someone who had been around the family and who has described being with them earlier, including the time at the lake. His account, like others connected to that day, has been discussed as people try to understand the timeline, but it remains part of the overall picture rather than a confirmed explanation of what ultimately happened. Don Wells, Summer's father, was not at home at the time. He was reportedly at work, which means everything that occurred during those final moments happened without him there. His understanding of that day comes from what he was told afterwards. When you step back and look at it, the final part of Summer's last day is centered around a very small number of people describing a very small number of moments. And that matters because the smaller that circle is, the fewer directions the timeline can realistically go. As the case gained attention, those closest to it began speaking publicly. Interviews were given, statements were made, and people tried to explain what they believed happened that day. But for many watching, it wasn't just the information, it was how it was presented. The tone, the pacing, the way certain questions were answered or avoided, and how the story was explained over time. Some viewers have described those interviews as difficult to follow, not because of a single statement, but because the overall picture never fully settled. At times, responses seemed to move around rather than directly answering a question. That doesn't prove anything on its own. People react differently under stress, and communication can break down under pressure. But in a case where the timeline depends heavily on personal accounts, the way those accounts are delivered becomes part of how they're understood. Over time, some details surrounding that day have been described slightly differently across interviews and public statements. The timing, the sequence of events inside the home, and who saw what and when have not always been presented in exactly the same way. These aren't necessarily major contradictions, but they're enough to keep the timeline from settling into one clear version. And in a case that depends on such a small window of time, even small differences matter, because those differences are the only things separating a story that feels complete from one that feels uncertain. At a certain point, the questions stop being what could have happened and become something more specific. What actually fits everything we know without forcing it to make sense? Because in this case, every explanation seems to answer part of the situation, but none of them fully account for all of it at once. One possibility is that she left on her own, that she wandered off and something happened outside. But if that's the case, there should be some indication of that path, especially with the level of search effort that took place early on. Another possibility is that someone else was involved, that someone came there and maybe took her. But that has to fit the same timeline and the same setting and the same lack of a clearly observed moment. And then there's the possibility that whatever happened began before she was even reported missing, inside the same place that she was last seen. None of these explanations can be fully confirmed based on publicly available information, and each one leaves questions that aren't fully answered. Where things stand now, the case is still open. There has been no confirmed resolution and no clear explanation that accounts for what happened. However, there have been continued efforts over time, including reported searches of nearby properties and renewed searches around the Wells home. In some cases, areas have been revisited, examined more closely, and even dug up. These kinds of actions suggest that investigators are still following leads and are still trying to account for something that hasn't been fully explained. The case hasn't been closed. It's still active, still being worked, and still waiting for something that connects all of the pieces together. And underneath all of this, every detail, every theory, every question is still a child, 5 years old, in a place where she should have been safe. The last thing reported is that she went downstairs. After that, there is no clear moment to follow, just a gap that still hasn't been filled. If you have any information about Summer Wells, no matter how small it may seem, you're encouraged to contact the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation or the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office. Tips can also be submitted at the 1-800 TBI Find, because sometimes the smallest detail changes everything.